never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life.
Oh, I'm sorry. You just walked in here. I was just rolling some dice.
Rolling my dice.
I got a 3.
Matt, do you like it when people call them math rocks, or do you hate it?
Nah, that's too precious. That's too clever.
I
half, but they are math rocks. We're here to talk about how math rocks and math rocks.
Nice. I like that.
Today. Yeah.
This is Dungeon Master of None.
I'm Dungeon Master Matt.
I'm Dungeon Master Rob, and we're doing something a little bit different today. Yeah, we're going to be talking about dice and dice mechanics, rolling dice resolution systems. We're talking about the whole rolling shebang.
Yeah, and we got to be careful here because we're going to talk about a lot of mechanics, and these will inevitably bleed over into other things that role-playing games do to make fun happen at your table. But we really want to stick to just the math, the dice part.
Yeah. So two caveats and two potential pitfalls for us, Matt. Like, one is exactly what you said. This is just dice. This is just mechanics, which are only a part of role-playing games. They are part that I do think matters, though there is some disagreement on this point. And
then the second part is stepping on a D4. Oh boy, howdy. That hurts. That's the second pitfall.
The second part is that, this is math. And Matt and I are both okay at math. Matt's even pretty good, but we are not mathematicians. So it is possible that we will overlook something, though probably not. But if you are a hyper math nerd and we say something that is incorrect or imprecise, please don't get mad, I guess is what I'm saying.
But you can write us in and tell us. And I guess the other consideration is that if you're just a dungeon master or game master running games or just playing in games, like, why care, right?
Yeah.
Like, why should you care about all of the wide world of dice resolution mechanics, where there's funky dice, there's normal dice, you're rolling 1 dice, 2 dice, a fistful of dice. Why should anyone care about this?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on this. I mean, I do think it's interesting. Just period. I think that these are fun to think about and cool. But even if you love the system that you have and you don't want to change, and you're not designing your own RPG, I do think that there are some reasons to look into this. And I think a big reason is it'll make you a better game master. It'll make it better at running the game for a couple of different reasons. One is that at some point in your career as game master, you are going to be asked to adjudicate. You are going to have to, you're coming up against a mechanical problem that you have to come up with a resolution for or an answer to. And understanding how dice work, how the math behind the dice works, will make that a little bit easier for you. The other reason is that even if you don't intend to change, there are ways to implement these systems or perhaps use them as an alternate rule set. There's a pretty neat 3d6 replacement for 3rd edition, I think, for D&D, which is a variant rule. You might not want to use this, but I think that it could be interesting and something worth experimenting with. And that's just one example of many. And then I think, if knowing about these, I think in hearing about and learning about different ways of resolving conflict or tests in role-playing games, you may find something that you like or you're interested in, which may point you, if you are interested in a new system or a new type of game, towards something that you might want to try. So keep an open mind.
Yeah, like Rob said, at the very least, maybe you'll consider and learn about some other things to just decide, hey, that sounds dumb. Perfect. That's great. At least you'll learn about some new dice mechanics.
I mean, for my part, the reason why I'm coming to this, and we'll, I think, talk about this in greater detail later, but I mostly played D20 systems for probably the first 10 or 15 years of being a role-playing gamer, TTRPGer. And there, I'm going to, D20 is not my favorite. A lot of this is going to come down to personal preference. By the way, people, there are arguments to be made for different systems, but I found, and there was one specific thing that kept coming up that really like turned me against D20, which was that if, that my 20 strength barbarian had a 25% chance, no, 25 plus percent chance of failing to push open a DC 10 like stuck door, just because of the way that a D20, like the distribution works. And I found over time that really fucking annoyed me. It really, I mean, there are things that can be done. A good GM will just like say, of course you just open the door, but like rules as written, to do certain skills tasks, you have to make a roll. And even if you are specialized in that skill in a D20 system, linear distribution, you have a pretty good chance of failing. And my sort of objection to this is that a very strong person should almost never fail to open a stuck door that they are, strong enough to open. But the way that this is simulated in D&D specifically really bothered me. So this is sort of like the
This is your supervillain origin
yeah, this is my
story
Joker.
here?
This is my Joker moment. Yes.
Okay.
But there are lots of other things that sort of like push me in that direction. But this was the thing that I guess sort of like broke my immersion, frustrated me with regards to verisimilitude, that made me start looking at other systems more seriously, because it just kept bothering me.
Yeah. I think like at a big, 30,000 hex grid view, right? We're looking at the hex map of role-playing games, right? All role-playing games, especially ones these days, usually have pretty good advice on like when you make a check or something like that. It needs to be interesting. There should be a chance of failure. But like the variance in like what that chance might actually be, the variance in what dice actually mean, and, also the like, I think it's also important, like what feeling you get from rolling the dice.
Yes.
Like not just, they're not just math rocks, Rob. They're math feeling rocks, they're
feelings rocks too.
Yeah. And like, because I mean, there's a number of reasons is that people like get attached to their dice. People are constantly holding and fiddling with them with the game. And then certain dice I feel like have, and this is entirely subjective, differing degrees of how much fun it is to roll them, right? How difficult it is to roll them, how easy it is, what sort of satisfying feeling you get from rolling one or a handful of dice. And it also comes down, the feeling part is because the human brain is bad at math.
Yes. Yes.
Rob, I'm sure you've heard of this because you've played this game way more than I have, but you've played the game XCOM, right?
I have. I know what you're going to say, but yeah, go ahead. This is a crazy anecdote. This is true. Yeah.
So if you're not familiar, XCOM is a very like tactical, like squad combat game of humans versus aliens. And displayed on your like video game screen whenever you're playing it is your chance to hit, right? And something that's familiar for anyone who's played a role-playing game. And I was looking at XCOM because someone had told me about how the game engine worked. And I Googled like, hey, what do people feel about the game? And I came across forum post after forum post about people saying XCOM cheats, like the video game software in the back end. If you're doing too well, they manipulate the probabilities and they give the enemies a better chance to make the mission more interesting or to make you have to like restart once, right? So people feel like the odds of the game are fake and against them, and it's harder than it actually says. But in reality, it's the complete opposite. Rob, do you want to read that quote?
Let's see. This is from a Gamer Rant article. XCOM 2 lies to the player about a character's hit percentage. In actuality, the game gives players a much higher chance of hitting than what's on display. On easier difficulty settings, an 85% chance is closer to a 95% chance, according to an interview with Jake Solomon, the lead designer for XCOM 2.
So and if you read the interview, you talk to them, the developers are like, we found through playtesting, people feel like a 90% chance is a sure thing, right? And people feel like a 99% chance is it's impossible to fail. when in fact, in reality, you fail 1 out of 100 times.
Right.
And we had to fudge those numbers because people were too unhappy that their chances felt too low.
When you think about this does make sense because you remember, like, you don't remember when you take a chance on a 45% or 55% shot, which is, a coin flip, right? And you hit those, right? That seems like, sure, whatever, 50-50, I hit that. But you remember every single time you have an 85 or 90 or 95% shot and you miss, even though that has a, 5, 10, 15% chance of happening, which is, pretty common.
Yeah.
But yeah, the human brains are very, very bad about this. And we'll talk about some of this later, but like, that's why the math behind the math rocks is important, right? You don't actually want, like, you want most of your roles to succeed more than you think that they ought to, if that makes sense. Like, when your players need to succeed better than 50% of the time, because if it's 50% of the time, they're going to feel like it's 100% of the time that they're failing. Like, you want to put some weight on player roles or give them tools to succeed, because natural probability feels unfair to humans.
Shot failed to connect.
This is a little bit different because there's a lot of more contextual factors, but this is one of the reasons that some people, not all, felt frustrated with 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons, is that the math, which, like Rob said, got the basic principle right, you hit more often than you don't, like 55, 60% of the time. But as you leveled up, that percentage never changed, right?
Yeah.
Because the defense scores and AC scores of monsters went up basically in proportion to player scores. There's some variance and stuff like that, but overall, your to hit never really changed, and people felt like their characters never got more powerful because of that. Some people did, right? Now, again, that's not the whole story of 4th edition or the only thing good or bad about 4th edition, but they got the math right? Probability was perfect. It was maybe better than any other edition of D&D, but the feeling was bad. The vibes were bad.
The balance was too good, which sounds crazy,
Insane,
but is a legitimate problem. So let's just talk about dice. Let's talk how they work. Let's talk about, like, the basics of, like, what, we know what dice are supposed to simulate. They are that's a random number generator or whatever, but like, we got 3 basic distributions for dice.
So yeah, let's talk about a distribution. A distribution is just saying the way, like, the probability of hitting any random number can be, like, graphed out. And if you've been to any type of schooling, you've seen a distribution, right? There's an x-axis and a y-axis, and a basic die, right? A d20, a d6, rolled by itself gives you a flat distribution, which is to say that unless you've got, like, a cheating loaded die that you had those 2 hick NASCAR brothers in Ocean's 13 break into dice manufacturing plant in Mexico and start a labor rebellion action in order to create loaded dice, you have a flat probability. So when you roll a d6, there's an equal chance of getting any of the 6 facings. When you roll a d20, there's an equal chance of rolling a 20 or a 16 or an 11 or a 2.
And Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, all D20 systems use a very simple linear D20 resolution, right? You have exactly as much chance of getting a 1 as you do a 20. You will crit 5% of the time, and you will critically miss 5% of the time.
The great advantage of, like, a linear system like this is it's very easy to grok, right? If you're like, I need an 18 or higher, right? You have a 15% chance of getting it, right? You can essentially calculate the odds in your head if you want to, right? You may not know what the feel of those odds actually are because your brain isn't computer or die, but yeah, you will know the number. And what gets interesting, right, is if you add more than 1 die. If you roll 2 6-side dice or 2 20-side dice, the probability distribution of the total numbers, if you add the numbers together, that you get changes from a flat distribution to something that looks like a chevron, a peak, right? Where there's a line going up, straight line, and a line going down, a triangular distribution. And as you add more dice, this curve approaches the normal distribution, the bell curve, right? So if you add 3 dice, it's a pretty close approximation. Again, this is only if you add the numbers together. If you're just taking the numbers to represent numeral values, so let's say you roll your D100, your D percentile, where one represents a hundreds digit and the other represents a tens digit, that's still a flat distribution, right? Because all the chances are equal because you're not doing any addition.
Yeah, and this is Matt has it exactly right. I mean, there are other advantages, but I would say sort of the basic argument for a linear distribution is that it's theoretically easy to math, right? D&D really amusingly fucks this up by adding a bunch of modifiers that makes it hard to math. But theoretically, you have 1 die and you just look at the number and then you know if you have succeeded or failed. Getting to 3 or more, you do have to add die together. Can be hard, can be easy, depending on what those dice are and how good you are at mental math. The thing about the thing about a bell curve, or the advantage, is that your distribution is a lot more normalized. You're not going to fail to open the door as a 20 strength barbarian as often as you will with a D20. In fact, you will almost never. But you also won't critically succeed quite as often. You will much rare. You will see 16, 17, 18 much more rarely than you see a 20 in a D20 like linear distribution. These are, again, this is about feel, this is about preference, good things and bad things.
The idea of a normal distribution is that, like 60% of the results thereabouts fall within one standard deviation of the mean, right? So it's like, okay, most of the time you're pretty close to the very center of your probability roll, the average roll. I think at another fundamental way, where we still have flat distributions, triangular distributions, or something approximating a bell curve, is what the actual dice mean, right? Because rolling dice where dice mean numbers is only one approach. So when you roll a die and it has a number, I guess the first caveat is that dice is then converted into a symbolic meaning, right? Into language and communication, right? When you're trying to unstick that door, success, or rolling above a certain number translates into success or opening the door. Rolling under it, failure or failing to open the door. Mini systems, right, are not numeric, where you don't have a number and then you convert it into something else, but they go what I would call straight to symbolic dice. The dice may still have numbers, but the numbers don't matter. They could be replaced with emojis or special symbols or something. What you roll on the dice is straight a symbolic meaning, right? The Genesis system does this with their own special symbols, but so do lots and lots of other systems. Ones we've talked about on here, like Blades in the Dark, right? When you roll a 6, it doesn't really mean a 6. It means success, right? You could change it for any other number because you're never adding numbers together. You never add numbers to roll. You never add numbers of dice together. You may add symbols together, right? You could have multiple successes in Blades in the Dark, which means you have a critical success. But the numbers don't actually matter.
Right. And this cleverly addresses the problem with rolling multiple dice, which is that you might have to do math, and makes it simple because all you have to do is you can roll a dozen dice, and all you need to do is count up the number of 5s and 6s to know, did I succeed? Did I not succeed? Shadowrun works like this. And
right. Shadowrun's a great example of a symbolic dice system.
Yeah.
That is actually full of like math and crunchiness, but it doesn't really matter. You just need dice where you have a symbol on the 1 in case of glitches and symbols on the 5s and 6s for successes.
Yeah, every other face could be blank and it wouldn't matter. And what's cool about that is, you still get to do the crunch and the math, but all that has to do with is how many dice are you rolling? Because like once it comes down to counting the successes on the dice, yeah, you're just looking for basically those symbols, right? The 5 and the 6 and the 1 are basically abstracted, and this is cool, right? Because Matt, there's I think the big point, or I think an important thing to remember about dice, is that not everybody loves to do math. Not everybody can do math as quickly or at the same level. And so either the math needs to be simple or you need to abstract the math away, ideally. And linear distributions make the math simple. You're just looking at a number. And something like a symbolic dice pool like Shadowrun or Blaze in the Dark avoids math entirely, except just counting. You're just counting up the number.
How
of
many
successes.
dice do you pick up, right?
Yeah.
It might be how many you re-roll or something like that in special cases. One of my favorite examples of, I mean this complimentary, not derogatory, of like dice theory nerds is the FU RPG by Nathan Russell. And
this was a new one for me. This is really cool.
This is FU stands for not what you think it is, but freeform universal role-playing game. And this cuts to the quick of just like, we've all kind of figured out there's maybe only 6 reasonable general possibilities from an action where we want to roll a dice. And so in the FU RPG, you roll 1 6-sided dice and you try and, quote, beat the odds by rolling even numbers. Get it? So even numbers are successes, odd numbers are failures. So a 6 is a yes and, 4 is a yes with nothing else, 2 is a yes but, and then the same for the odds. 5 is a no but, 3 is a no, 1 is a no and. This is meant to be like, hey, do you want to play a really quick rules light game? Here you go. Roll a single die, and these are your outcomes. And of course, there's rules for adding different modifiers and special abilities and things like that. But I love, hey, what if we took all this artifice away? And here you go.
Yeah, and I think part of the fun is in the artifice and in the chunky combinations. But I also do appreciate, what FU has done in sort of, boiling it down to its constituent parts, because I think that lets you understand it and then build from that. And also, we are talking a lot about ways to resolve things, but a lot of RPGs are incredibly simple and only need, you can resolve a lot of things with a coin flip. That is a valid and fun way to play. It's just, my belief is that players like to roll dice or flip cards or, some other form of random mechanic because it's fun. And so you do, we do like to play games that include these things rather than just having a, coin flip, heads you do it, tails you don't. I might be wrong about this. I might be wrong. Maybe the game that takes the world by storm is literally just like a coin flip
a coin
with a bunch of lore attached.
We don't know. And it's funny though, if we think about games in this way, right? For example, you might be like, well, the most popular non-D20 system, I would say the 2 most popular are something like Call of Cthulhu or Delta Green or basic role-playing where you have a percentile dice and you try and roll under, or a Powered by the Apocalypse game where you always roll 2d6, so you have that nicer linear distribution curve. But these games like Innovation, right, is usually along the lines of just having different tiers of resolution, right? So if you look at the dice rolling in Blades in the Dark, you're rolling 2d6 and then you're comparing your total plus or minus a number with 4 categories, right? Critical success with complications, or failures, right? Those are your 4 categories. And so you convert your number into a symbolic meaning. And I think one of the popular reasons the Forged in the Dark, Powered by the Apocalypse, not the Forged in the Dark, the Powered by the Apocalypse system is so popular is that it's a really good distribution of those outcomes. And if you have a +2 or a +3, like you're incredibly likely to not get the lowest one, right? Like a very low percentage. And if you have a -3, you're never going to get that top one, So It feels right, and it gives you a wide variety of outcomes. It's a good dice system, I'm going to
It's
say.
a good dice system. I mean, there's a lot of things that are good about Powered by the Apocalypse, but I think Matt's right in that the balance, this might sound weird because it's a very, very simple system, but the balance is very, very good. And it's very, very easy to implement in all types of settings and forms of gameplay. And it's hard to mess up as a player, and it feels right. That's because it's very simple, but like there is a reason why that like 2d6 is such a common resolution mechanism. And Matt,
And
I
if it
think you're
was
right.
1d12, it wouldn't work at all.
It wouldn't work. That's exactly right. It wouldn't work. I mean, 1d12 is fun for its own reasons, but yeah, it does not yield the same result. And I think, yeah, probably like by volume in terms of like actual like individual games, it probably is the second most popular dice resolution mechanic. There's a few others that we should talk about. You know, and this is I was thinking about this as I was doing research, but like there's the West End system, which is a
Oh yeah.
additive dice pool, and this is shockingly rare, or more uncommon than I would have expected it to, because people like big numbers. But this is another fistful of dice thing, except that you're adding them together instead of like looking for like a target number, and that's that takes a little bit more time, but it's not, to me, like insurmountable. But yeah, it's not something that you actually see in a ton of games. If you're looking for big numbers, you're still probably going to be a game where you're adding up big numbers. It's still going to be a D20 system more often than not.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think in what we're used to, back to what like we're used to, of like a D20 system or something like that, like most systems don't use an additive dice system, right? When they give you some dice to roll, whether it's something with a curve like 3d6 in let's say GURPS, or a D20 or a D100, something that's flat like in Call of Cthulhu or D&D or Pathfinder, you sort of just have to ask yourself, well, am I rolling under? Am I rolling over? And rolling over, I would say it's one of those like, what is the feel at your table? And I would say the feel of rolling high numbers is usually better. The math for rolling under systems is often like easier to do, because you usually give a player and say everything under this number works, right? It's harder to do. You can always reverse things, but it's harder to do the math with the over numbers. Something like the 2d20 system of modifiers, right? The math is super easy because you give the players figure out what their number is, and then they decide how many dice to roll, and then they roll them.
Yeah, and this is funny because like I personally, this is pure personal preference, but I do not like roll under systems because my brain is inherently looking for high numbers, and then I have to remind myself that I'm looking to roll low. And it's not a big deal. I will play those systems and enjoy them. I just think that like I inherently am like big number good, and yeah, it's a feel thing.
Right. And if you play, let's say hero system or something long enough, eventually you can retrain your brain. And if you ever rolled, 3 1s on 3d6, an incredibly rare occurrence, you'll be like, oh, holy shit, this is great.
Speaking of additive, one of my favorite systems is, I guess this is technically a different system, but is Savage Worlds. And Savage Worlds is a step die system, right? So we've discussed this before, but the way that it works is that, as your skills and abilities get better, you'll roll a larger die. So, it goes from D4 to D6 to D8, D12, all the way theoretically up to D20.
Or D12 plus D4, right?
Oh, that's right. Sorry, it doesn't actually go to D20. This is really like revelatory to me because I think actually the math does not. In fact, the math on this is actually pretty bad. I think in many cases it's better to roll like a D4 than a D6, just in terms of getting the right outcome, especially since in Savage Worlds the dice explode. But I love Savage Worlds anyway because it's fun and simple and rewarding. You get better, you roll a bigger dice. And you theoretically get bigger numbers. You roll, a bunch of different ones at once. I think this is
This is a great example to unpack all the things that you just said there of our earlier propositions of like math versus feelings. And like, this is a great system where the math may not be perfect, but honestly, does it matter that much?
right.
The feeling is great because you have two things, right? Bigger dice for better things, and you have the feeling, the reward of a dice exploding. So what does a dice exploding means? If you roll the highest value, you roll that dice again and usually continue to add that number.
Right. And you can get really large numbers. And yeah, I think this is illustrative because it it demonstrates that the feel of it is very, very important. And Savage Worlds feels fun, even though it's a little bit harder to optimize because the math is weird. It's also easy for players to understand. It's bigger dice is better. It's these things
It makes
matter.
rolling the maximum amount feel great, right?
Yes.
Because you get to roll it again. Another great example of this point of feeling versus probability is one of your favorite systems, Cyberpunk Red, right?
Yeah.
Which not only has exploding dice, it has collapsing dice, right? If you roll a 1, you roll that 1 again and subtract even more. So it's the opposite of exploding dice. One of the quirks of this system is that it's impossible to add 10 to your bonus from a roll or to add 1. Those values can never come up because of the exploding and collapsing mechanic, which creates like a weirder distribution curve than you might think if you chart it out. And it also means in some situations there's like you should never like spend like the thing to give you a boost because it won't change your probabilities because 10s and 1s are impossible. However, those things are so edge that they probably don't matter that much. And I would guess at your table, you've had the most experience running and playing in it. The feeling of exploding and the despair of collapsing are way more fun than any math.
They are. This is a great example because you're absolutely right. The incentives are a little bit weird because of what happens on a 1 and what happens on a 10, but it's easy to it's relatively easy to understand and add because you were just, a D10 is it's a pretty simple die. And the excitement and the highs and lows are very high and very low. And that's a great example.
The other like thing that you want to think about with mechanics like exploding dice or rerolls or stuff like that, or even the mechanic of adding numbers to dice, which is so common in many popular role-playing games, is what is the trade-off of having a fun, I get to roll this dice again versus the added time, right? It may be small in the moment, but it will add up over the course of play in one night, right? Is the fun trade-off worth the extra time it takes at your table?
Yeah, and this is something I think a lot of designers get wrong. I've played a lot of TTRPGs with a lot of different dice resolution systems, and I think it is very common for designers to get excited about the math and the elegance of their system and not think about how it plays out at the table and how much time it adds and how long it takes to figure out the resolution. That's not to say that those are bad necessarily. There are lots of both like TTRPGs and board games that have, relatively complicated resolution mechanisms that are a lot of fun. But Matt makes a good point. Like if you're doing that dozens of times a night, like how much does that add to, the doing math part of the game, which is very rarely anybody's favorite part.
It also, the like even more extreme version of this, Rob, would be what I would call we're moving away from pure dice here to other mechanics, but they're so intertwined we can't is like a decision, what I would call a decision point. You roll the dice and then before the outcome is resolved, you have the option to re-roll a dice, roll the dice again, roll a different dice, it can often be you roll the dice. Like this is a great example from something similar to Savage Worlds Cortex Prime, where you roll a pool of dice and then you decide which ones to keep, and your decision over which dice to keep has an effect on the outcome.
Yeah, and this ties into, we were talking about universal house rules recently, and I encourage, we think this is a really good idea, you to use like sort of like an advantage disadvantage system in your games, even if it doesn't inherently come with one, because I think it's such an easy like lever to pull. Just either re-roll or roll to add, roll to subtract. This does potentially have it can slow things down, right? It can add
if it's
more
a re-roll,
decisions.
it can slow down. If it's at the beginning, right, it's not adding any more time, right? Which
Right.
is one of the nice things about advantage. But yeah, it's one of those things like from Cortex Prime is that anytime you make or most of the time when you make a roll, right, it's an elegant system, but players have to choose which dice to keep. So there's another point of analysis paralysis. A system I like a lot that I've run in my a couple one shots in Tales from the Loop and Vaesen, right, the Year Zero engine, is basically every roll you make, you have a decision. Do I want to re-roll? Do I want to push this roll? Do I want to re-roll stuff? That one's maybe a little easier to make because did I succeed or fail? You don't have to think about, well, I don't know what the opposing pool is going to roll yet. I know I failed. Do I want to ride this failure or do I want to roll again? But the good things about these more complicated mechanics is that you're adding more, I guess, granularity or distance in your dice roll, and maybe that's what you want for a game, right? Are dice rolls meant to be super quick and move on, or I think this is something, right, Blades in the Dark, Powered by the Apocalypse systems do really well, is because the roll requires you to then reference the chart, which you'll memorize after an hour, right? The rolls are usually meant to be bigger and larger stakes, to do more story and resolution at your table than these kind of quick, flat, binary pass-fail checks.
Yeah, and I think this gets to what you were saying, Matt. It's the roles aren't happening in a vacuum, right? And it does, like, they work together with the other mechanics of the game, right? What do they impact? How important is each individual role? How much do you need to know about the outcome of the role and the what you are rolling against? And this can make a complicated resolution mechanic simple, or it can make it fast, or it can make it like a little bit more gamey. I like an interesting example here is Dogs in the Vineyard. And Matt, I know that this is a favorite of yours, and this has a matching like dice mechanic, and you can raise, you can see,
you can bid,
escalate,
you can
bid,
escalate, you can then re-roll some of the dice. It's basically a whole back and forth conversation that could take 10 minutes, to be honest, especially the first couple times you do it.
And this is against
technically like one roll. It tells a whole story. It could be a whole scene through that one roll. But
and this is you're competing with, in competition with the GM here. There are other ways to do this matching that aren't like that. But like what I like about systems like that, even though it's complicated, I'm sort of like looking at the combinations I'm seeing, and like, my brain is just sort of like, okay, I see something happening here. I'm gonna raise, I'm gonna escalate, just based on like what's in front of me, even though there may be like a perfectly optimized way to combine those dice or work with that roll. That goes very quickly for me. I really like that. And I like board games that have mechanics like that, because even if I'm not doing the exact right optimized thing, like I see a pattern and I know where to go. So even though that's technically complicated, it feels very engaging and fun and quick for me. And I think that's something, that's a personal preference for me, but I think that's something to think about when looking at these mechanics, because something can be complicated and involved and time consuming. But if you're having fun during that resolution, or if your players are having fun during that resolution, then that's okay. That's part of the game.
I think anytime we're thinking about rolling dice, and the reason why I think there's such a plethora of dice systems and diceless systems is everything in this like resolution is a trade-off, right? Do you want it speedy? Do you want it detailed? Do you want nice aesthetics and big numbers, or do you want a good probability curve? Maybe you enjoy the randomness of a system, right? Where anyone can succeed on a task, and that fits the feel of your game, right? I can't imagine, right? We love it when the dice mechanics fit a system, right? You mentioned earlier how great it is to roll 3d6 in third edition Dungeons and Dragons, but can you imagine rolling 3d6 in a game like Morkborg, where like the randomness of like getting your fingers chopped off?
Yeah,
never, right?
I mean, that's why I have come to enjoy, why I've become a little OSR pilled, because the mechanic that annoys me in a slightly more narratively focused game like 5e feels terrific in Shadow Dark or Labyrinth Lord, where your guys are a bunch of adventuring goons who are stumbling their way through a dungeon and may very well get splattered at any point, and that's okay. That's desirable, right? And for them to both wildly succeed and wildly fail feels appropriate to the game and to the setting.
Yeah. I think the opposite of this like type of randomness, but still with like math rock level dice, is another quirky system I wanted to bring into our conversation. Sort of the opposite of the FU RPG, which is the ORE, the OR, the One Roll Engine by Greg Stoltze. And it is used in a number of different systems, commonly with a pool of D10s, though really it could be D6s, D8s, any die, really, where you roll your pool and your entire goal is to create matches, pairs, triads, or even more matches. And the number, if you get a match, you've rolled a success. The value on the die of the match, right, is how well you succeeded at something. The number of matches is how well you succeed at something. And the value on the die is how quickly you did it. So, you can imagine a player rolling 9 D10s and they get 2 8s, but 3 2s. Well, they can now make a choice to do something very, very quickly and well, or do it way better, but for it to take long. The idea of one rule is that it gives you 2 values, both width and height, right? Which, if your game values something besides like quality or degree of success and speed, right, those could be replaced with 2 other symbolic signifiers for resolution. And again, this is another example of someone who got way too much in my opinion, into the theory of rolling dice. In practice, I found this is not exactly super fun. But the idea, you can imagine someone being like, well, how do I get more than one thing out of my value of my dice? Perfect. This. I think it's a neat idea.
I think it's a really neat idea too. And I had not encountered this until Matt showed it to me, and I'm in love with it. It appeals to my, elegant system that, drives action forward, that creates narrative, but it's also, Matt's entirely correct, this is not intuitive. It's also like not probably like easy to run or fun. I think this would probably be perfect for like a virtual tabletop or even like a video game, because the mechanics behind it are super great. And I don't want to write it off entirely because I would love to actually try this out. But yeah, I think it's a good example of a system where, exactly like Matt said, the math is good, but like, how does it feel to play? And I'm already, even though I understand the math behind it, I'm a little bit, it's confusing, and I'm a little intimidated by trying to put it into practice. But
Plus, it's got all of those things. It's got a decision point in it.
Yes, that's right. There's probably
Ah.
a way to smooth some edges off of this, but the idea is super, super cool.
Yeah. I think it's also on that extreme edge of like, I dare you without using a spreadsheet or like a computer program to actually know what the probabilities are. Okay, you can be like, okay, a match is still 1 in 10 or something, but like when you're like, well, what is the probability of, and what is the degree of one number versus the number of others? It's very much, I think it would work well if you really just stuck to vibes.
Yeah.
Okay, Rob, should we try and get towards a conclusion and then maybe talk about any of our loose end favorite quirky dice systems, some criteria to investigate?
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I'm thinking about this, and what I have become fixated on in recent weeks and months, years, and is something that we've talked about before. But we play games where you roll dice. What's the purpose of rolling the dice, right? We are simulating something. We are trying to implement chance, randomness, some kind of, there's differing opinions on what the purpose of the dice is, but and I feel like we, as the hobby, as a community, have not quite gotten this perfectly figured out, which is why there's, as Matt has said,
so much innovation,
which is good in so many dozens of different systems, and no sort of like overruling or singular resolution mechanic that everybody uses. And I would say a clear indication of this is the fact that, look, even if you like D20, I really have to argue this not a very good like dice resolution mechanic. That it is not a good one, except that a D20 is kind of fun to roll, and it's simple. But so the point I'm making here is that we are still sort of like muddling through the getting this right, and we talk a lot about mechanics and serving the system, and that's why I'm so interested in this, because I think that having the right dice resolution mechanic for your game is actually quite important. And it can be very simple, but having the wrong one can damage, the type of story, the type of game that you're trying to play.
Let's get specific with this. And since you brought up a D20 third edition, OD&D 5th edition as the thing you're tilting against here, let's look at two interesting dice mechanic solutions to that: Pathfinder 2E and Daggerheart. They're actually very, very similar systems in that you have a numeric value that usually is modified by a roll. Pathfinder keeps the D20, but adds in granularity successes, right? Critical successes, critical failures for basically every action. Those are unique to each action. It means that the math bonuses you get become very important. A +1 bonus is a thing to be sought after. And this game becomes very much about like having good bonuses for your character for lots of different roles. Daggerheart wants that sort of same, can we add granularity of degrees to success, have a non-binary outcome, and does it by two ways: having a 2d12 roll, which gives you that triangular distribution curve, but also by differentiating the dice, right? One die has to be a hope die, one is a fear, and whichever is higher is that way that, in kind of the way the one roll engine can tell you multiple things with a single roll, Daggerheart does as well. It tells you whether you succeed or fail by the number, and whether an and or a but to your resolution by which of your dice are higher.
Yeah, and for me, I'm happy to admit that my eureka moment on this was Daggerheart, because I really like, and I'm really looking forward to the next playtest, how the dice mechanics serve the story and the type of game that you want to play, and how they just sort of like numerically, math-wise, are close enough to D&D that people are not going to struggle with the numbers involved, but it works a little bit better. The triangular distribution of a 2d12 is just a bit less swingy, and but still has some like pretty exciting like big number moments. And Pathfinder's the other like great example. Matt, you're absolutely right. It keeps the entire like basic structure, but by adding critical successes and failures for just getting high enough numbers, it solves a lot of the problems that plague, plague 5e or 3.5, not perfectly, but it lets you get big bonuses. And then if you put a bunch of resources into, or character resources into, I'm a big, strong barbarian, you will succeed most of the time, and you will critically succeed even when you don't roll a 20. These are elegant solutions to, to a dice problem, which I believe exists, the thing I am tilting against in 5e.
I think another way to solve this problem, to give another example of an approach, is to change what the resolution is against. One of the elegant parts of Powered by the Apocalypse games, right, is really at the end of the day, it's the same resolution as D&D 5e. You roll a die, or in this case, a triangular distribution die, and you add numbers to it. You're still adding numbers to things. But in Powered by the Apocalypse, the target numbers you're going for never change, which means you don't have to have a conversation with the DM or wait for the DM to know what the resolution is. The DM can move straight to what this means. You can start talking about what this means, right? The set numbers of, below a 6 fails, 7 through 10 is a or 7 through 9 complicated success, 10 through 11 full success, 12 or higher a critical success. It's always the same, and almost always the same, even across different versions of using this engine. A game that is more similar to D&D that uses this is the Lancer and Icon systems, where, except in certain combats, basically the DC of 10 is always the DC. The DM can change other things by giving you penalty dice or something like that, but the DC never changes. And I find it interesting that a lot of games, even like games that use dice pools like Shadowrun or the storyteller / storytelling system, so like Vampire the Masquerade, have moved away from not only are we varying the number of dice we can roll, we're also varying what the number that you need to roll to equal a symbolic success is. No, it's always an 8 or higher, or in Shadowrun, it's always a 5 or 6.
Yeah, I think this I've seen this happen in a lot of recent TTRPGs, and I think this is I think that either fixing the target number or fixing the number for success, making one of those more static, is a good way to simplify, because having both be mobile adds a lot of work on either the player end or the GM end, and you can still have like a crunchy, satisfying system, but what you were trying to hit remains the same. I think this is smart, and this is where
it takes less pressure off the GM too. You don't have to say, well, the target number is a 7 or higher on the dice, or a DC 14. No, it's always the same.
Right. Your players know what they need to hit. Yeah.
This also brings up my least favorite dice mechanical system, though we like other parts of the riding the system, which is the kids on bikes, kids on broom system.
Yeah.
So not only do you have a fixed die, you roll always a single die. You have to roll high. It's also against a GM set target number, so the GM has to come with that. And the die is a variable step die, anywhere between a D4 and a D20. Knowing what to set the this is the linear like curve just changing to be a longer on the y-axis linear curve. I hate it all. One of my absolute least favorite mechanical resolution system.
I also hate this one. There are other good things about it, but yeah, this one really really annoys me. There's not a ton that I don't. I guess I was gonna say there's not a ton that I don't that I hate or that I'm not a fan of. I guess GURPS is a little like ho hum for me at this point, but it's nothing wrong with it. I actually love 3D6 as a
curve, yeah,
as a curve, but yeah, I that one is kind of messy. Yeah, I feel like I could talk about this forever because I'm interested in this. I like to roll dice. I think it's fun. I think this is it's interesting, and I think that my belief, the reason why I'm interested in this is I think that getting this right can take a ton of pressure off of both players and GM, right? The purpose of rolling the dice is to help ease the passage through the game, to make it make sense, to help resolve things that are otherwise complicated or contentious. And so it is important to put effort and time and thought into it. Yeah.
So I think what you brought up is to go back, scroll back, listeners, like 100 episodes to our review of the GinSys system, right?
Yeah.
For the generic system by Fantasy Flight Games, which in its mini iterations for Warhammer, Star Wars, there's another one I can't think of, all have a similar system where they have custom tiered step dice, right? So dice that increase from D4 through D12, and each one cuts through the chaff, right? We talked about there are symbolic dice ones where a number just equals a success, not its actual numeric value. They've replaced that with symbols that can give you things like success but advantages, or things on the horizon coming up, right? Bonus points to your pools. Like, all the things are there on the dice. The only problem is we've moved from the most available dice, a common D6, which everyone has, through polyhedral dice, which are readily available and not expensive, but you might not have them, to custom dice you have to purchase from this manufacturer.
Yeah, the Genesis dice are interesting. You can simulate them with
there's an online dice roller. You can have a chart you look up on.
Yeah, you can use regular dice, but unfortunately, they are really satisfying to roll, and actually those games are easy to run and easy to understand because of those big stupid symbols on their proprietary dice. They just annoy me because they're proprietary dice. But it is like one of my favorite dice rolling, dice resolution systems because it goes quickly and it's easy for everybody to understand because you're just looking at symbols.
Proprietary dice are great if you can get people to buy into them, right?
Yeah.
I love rolling though it's probably on the whole good that they're going away with second edition, the proprietary dice for Star Trek Adventures first edition, because it gives you damage for weapons, but also lets weapons have fun effects, right? And you wouldn't have that. It gives you more than one meaning. So it's a quick way to give yourself that tiered resolution of success, or a greater success, or a success with consequences on a single roll of the dice, which is super great. I mean, we talked about before how we hate rolling dice more than once, like rolling to hit and damage. But I mean, we both love the GinSys dice. It's just not everyone has them, and
right.
They're not cheap. And if I'm going to play a game with my friends around a table, we're going to roll actual dice because we've talked about how fun that is. So everything's a trade-off, right?
Everything's a trade-off, right? There's no perfect system, but there are a lot of things to consider, and good and bad, and considerations to balance when it comes to this sort of thing.
So if you like this episode and you want to support us on patreon.com, I'll include a link to my taxonomy of all dice systems I'm familiar with, which is pretty extensive, breaking down, do systems use numeric or symbolic values, or something else entirely? Are you rolling a fixed die? Are you at a fixed target number? Is the GM setting it? Are there explosions or not? And see how, are you rolling high or low? See how these systems group or do not group together. So I'll put that up for our patrons in outline and in chart form, along with the weird diceless systems and ones where neither symbolic nor numbers matter, only matching, which is like shout out to the early days of the forgeforums.com and Ron Edwards Sorcerer RPG.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's a great chart. I told Matt I wanted to do this episode, and he was like, "Great." And then he Rain Manned me. He hit me with this, enormous fucking. No, it's great. Clearly, I stepped in it. It's amazing.
So if you want to hear us talk more about dice systems, Rob
haven't had enough dice.
Oh boy, you can head over to our Patreon, where an upcoming episode will be Rob and I both talking through custom dice systems that we've been tinkering around with, how we arrived at them, what their trade-offs are.
Yeah. If you liked this, let us know. If you didn't like us, let us know. If we got something wrong, hit us up at dmofnone@gmail.com. Add us on Twitter at dmofnone.
And if you're interested more in like probabilities and like how to calculate them, we'll put links in the show notes to two websites that are absolutely essential for this. This is anydice.com and a personal favorite of mine, snake-eyes.io, sort of a more comprehensive but harder to program tool set for running these probabilities
Yeah, we should
and producing fun charts
at the beginning. But yeah, AnyDice is a great just like baseline for just understanding and visualizing the probabilities for really any combination of dice. It's super useful if you're thinking about this at all.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for listening. And you know it. Keep rolling them dice.